Next up, super excited, Caitlin Long from Custodia Bank. I'm among millions of people who follow what you put out on social media. Uh, it's truly, the commentary is, I think, reflects everything that we see globally. We are sort of following a little bit what the US is doing. Not practically, but we are taking notes. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. I'd love to welcome Caitlin Long. Sorry, I'm a bit starstruck, Caitlin.
Oh gosh.
I'm probably your biggest
Thank you.
fan, and a lot of people who are tuned in today probably are too. So welcome to the stage for pioneering the new frontier of finance in the United States with blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and digital assets. Thanks so much, Caitlin.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here. And I want to make sure to use everybody's time wisely and not go over time as well, since I know this is just kicking off. It would have been great to be with you in person because Australia has done some really great things on the regulatory front with blockchain and digital innovation generally, but Bitcoin specifically. So what's happening in the United States is, as usual, just crazy. And it seems to be changing. There's a sea change that seems to have occurred, which, quite frankly, I expected, because I think the regulators have figured out that it was not in the United States' interest to do what it seemingly wanted to do and what some of the folks in the power struggle within the Biden administration wanted to do. And that is to shove all of this activity offshore in the hopes that they could kill it. And it didn't die. I chuckle. I think we're up to 467, last I looked, Bitcoin obituaries written in the press saying Bitcoin's about to die any day, and it never does. And now, in fact, actually, there is a lot of buzz in the United States that the institutions are coming. The morality and the ethics of US federal regulators shoving the startups aside so that the large incumbents could take the space is a whole separate topic. And as you know, many of the startups actually are in litigation, Custodia ourselves included, for unlawful regulatory activities that really began back in January. But what has happened is the United States has gone through a whole of government systematic approach of essentially going after everyone who was a virtual asset service provider in the United States. Now, all that said, I am not in the camp of black and white criticizing what the United States government did, because I think it's very obvious that there was a massive amount of fraud, criminal activity, regular old scams that were in the gray area. And then, of course, on top of that, highly leveraged business models that have no business existing with Bitcoin. Why is that? I like to say Bitcoin and leverage do not mix, period. And unfortunately, a lot of startups had to learn that lesson the hard way. And the reason is because no one will ever make more than 21 million Bitcoins. And most of those Bitcoins are actually in the so-called diamond hand hodlers' hands. The percentage of Bitcoin that has not changed hands is, last I looked, at an all-time high. Okay, so the folks who haven't sold yet aren't likely to sell. There are not a lot of Bitcoins that actually change hands. Most folks are like me, just so-called hodling, sitting long-term. What does that mean? It means that if an institution gets itself leveraged, whether knowingly or not, that when the run on the bank occurs, that what will happen is the institution will quickly fail. And we saw that in spades. And to be honest, we're still seeing it with the recent announcement of Prime Trust. Most of us in the industry acknowledge that we know there are others coming. The wave of the failures of the service providers in this industry is not over yet in the United States. So not all of what the United States government did was undeserved. A big, huge chunk of it was. And I was just having a debate with somebody, very early Bitcoiner recently, on whether 90% of the industry needs to just blow up and go away, or 99% of the industry needs to just blow up and go away. So all that said, though, the US unfortunately took the position of literally everybody had to be shoved aside. And geopolitically, it was so interesting to watch what Hong Kong did in response to that. And it's crystal clear that Hong Kong has taken advantage of the problems in the United States to try to push the engineering talent and the know-how into the so-called shadows and offshore. And Hong Kong is stepping up to capitalize upon that. But what's now seemingly happening, that I just described what was essentially January through May of this year, with unfortunately Custodia Bank being at the front of the line, that this whole of government approach really started with Custodia being unlawfully denied our application by the Fed. However, the tide does seem to have turned, and it does seem to have turned with this rush of institutional applications for ETFs. And what's different about the institutional applications isn't necessarily who it is, although the buzz has been around BlackRock being the 10-ton gorilla in ETFs, and that they finally emerged to make an application to get an ETF approved by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The interesting issue isn't that. The more interesting issue is that the SEC has been saying for years that it needed market surveillance. And I will say I support the SEC on that. It's crystal clear that these Wild West markets have been manipulated. And again, Exhibit A is the amount of the fraud that has taken place. And so it's interesting that the applicants who have applied for ETFs have now they've teamed up with the exact same language. Now there are multiple applicants that have teamed up with NASDAQ to do market integrity surveillance work, and potentially that would increase the chances of getting an ETF approved. I've been on the record for years, in fact, started writing about this back in 2018, that the ETF is a double-edged sword for Bitcoin. Why? It certainly brings in more liquidity. But on the flip side, the Wall Street leverage games are going to be a lot easier to play. And now we come back to what I just described, where it was startups that were blowing themselves up on leverage games. And unfortunately, now we're actually going to see the very companies that I would argue should not be playing these leverage games with an asset of finite quantity, because there will never be a lender of last resort. And because of what I described with so few Bitcoin actually changing hands, there won't ever be a clearinghouse of meaningful size as well. So what does that mean? It means that no institution had better get more than one-to-one leveraged ever. The moment they become more than one-to-one leveraged, then it's just a matter of time before the market sniffs that out and the institution fails in the so-called run on the bank. No one's ever making more Bitcoin. But what I started warning in 2018 didn't quite come true, although in general direction it did. What I thought was going to happen was that the big Wall Street firms like Bakkt, which is a sister company to the New York Stock Exchange, using one of the major clearinghouses, I think it's ICE Clear LLC, which does their foreign exchange and I believe commodities clearing. What that means is that you can start to get commingling of collateral. Okay, so somebody's got an exposure on a Bitcoin contract, and instead of actually posting Bitcoin, they'll post dollars or they'll post Apple shares or what have you. Because of the way the ISDAs work, the commingling of collateral, it's easy to see how a clearinghouse can get over its skis in Bitcoin exposures. And when the correction inevitably comes, then again, the insolvency could end up becoming not just a problem for that institution, but if it's systemically important, like a clearinghouse like that, or some of the very large financial institutions, then you can quickly see how contagion could come in to the US system. So unfortunately, I think the US still doesn't have it right, that it doesn't quite understand it's dealing with a very different animal, and to use Trace Mayer's point, he called Bitcoin the apex predator of finance. Trace Mayer is one of the original Bitcoiners who started buying Bitcoin at 25 cents. And I think he's right that you don't mess around. You don't play leverage-based financialization games with Bitcoin. And unfortunately, we're now looking at some very large institutions coming in to do just that. Now, let me close by saying that I am impressed with what's happening in the rest of the world. And it was really fun as an American to get out of the United States and experience the excitement. I experienced it in Europe a few weeks ago, the excitement of what is happening. And Grace talked about Mika in Europe. Absolutely, there is forward progress among institutions and logical regulation taking place in the European market. The US is going to have some catch up to do, but it was really fun to see the rest of the world just moving straight ahead. There are some incredible projects underway that are being built, especially with layer 2 technologies in Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I am mostly a Bitcoiner. So of course, Lightning is the one that I am most focused on. That is a sleeper right now. If you're not working on Lightning or seeing what is happening with Lightning, the ability of 8 billion people in the world to move fiat currencies using Lightning as an intermediary currency is here today, if those 8 billion people know how to download the code on their smartphone and run it. So all that said, I can't be more bullish going into the halvening next year for Bitcoin on all the development activity. It's fun to be in a crypto winter like we're in right now, because those of us who've seen this before recognize we will come out of this. I can already see real pressures building from large financial institutions in the US to change the US's approach. And I saw a crack in the door when Fed Chair Jay Powell last week admitted that this is an asset class that has staying power. That is not what the Fed was saying back in January. So that does give me some optimism that the US, after, as Winston Churchill said, it sometimes takes a long time for the US to get things right, but eventually the US does. And I think that will be indeed the case for you here. I hope I didn't go over time. I just wanted to do a quick time check for you.
That was wonderful. And it is really, really exciting. I have to agree. It's winter, it's cold, but it's the most exciting winter I've ever been in. And there's a lot more happening than I think it meets the eye. So that was lovely, Caitlin. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the event. I really appreciate you including me in these introductory remarks.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks all.
Bye.